We are delighted that you're joining us for another podcast of Wake Up Align, and it is the podcast for chiropractors where we get to talk about chiropractic lifestyle, and topics of interest. You can contact us through our email, and that is mailbag@amcfamily.com. Welcome back to another episode of Wake Up Align. We have a very special roundtable in the studio today. My name is Dr. Shannon McMurtry. I'm your host, joined as always with Tom Owen. Tom, how are you doing today?
I am doing excellent, and ready to see what we can dive into today on today's episode.
Yeah, I got some special guests. Have Dr. Jeremy Brubaker. Say hello to everybody, Dr. Jeremy.
Hey, hello, everybody.
Nicely done. Yes. Good job.
Sometimes can follow instructions.
And we have the Dr. Zach Wilson joining us as well. We need, Mr. Producer, we need like an applause button or something. We need to, that was nicely, yeah, very good.
That's the applause button.
Dr. Zach, would you like to say hello to everybody?
May the record show I am the first one to receive an ovation on this podcast.
That is true. That is true. Very good. Well, we have these special guests in here because I know that one subject we haven't talked a lot about is philosophy, and philosophy is a very broad subject, especially chiropractic philosophy. So, this podcast could go in a lot of different directions if we're not careful. But to rein it in a bit, Dr. Jeremy, you wrote a article for the Align Good News newsletter for the Philosophy Corner recently, correct?
That's right.
Right. Now, I haven't looked at that article yet. Many of our listeners not even aware that there's a newsletter available. What was the subject of that article, and why did you choose that part of philosophy to write about?
Well, that's a good question because philosophy, I think, can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And like you said earlier, in chiropractic, you mentioned the word philosophy, you're going to get some sort of reaction or response. And some of it is, Dr. Zach and I are sitting here, we're both Palmer guys, Palmer Davenport, graduated, I think, the same class, if I'm not mistaken, Dr. Zach. So we were exposed to a philosophy at Palmer at that time. So Dr. Zach and I kind of resonate on that. But in that same class at Palmer, you say philosophy, there was a subset of our class, I remember specifically, that, how do I want to say this the right way? They didn't think there is a philosophy, or that a philosophy isn't scientific, or it isn't applicable, or is just nonsense created, just to fill our time. So there's just all kinds of different, I think that's probably still accurate.
I'm sure.
In our profession right now. And the little article you mentioned in Align Good News, I just brought up the fact that what actually is philosophy? What does that word actually mean? And I don't know, anybody here know what philosophy means definition-wise? If you look it up in the dictionary?
That's why I brought Dr. Zach Wilson into the studio today. So he was supposed to answer the tough questions.
I couldn't give you a definition of philosophy. I'm not a Webster, I'm a Wilson.
Nicely played. And there are a couple definitions, but one was just studying in a certain field, taking and just studying the precepts or the details of the field. So, philosophy, my son is in a philosophy class in college right now. So he's, I guess, technically a junior. Mm-hmm. He's a little ahead of the curve. And so he has a philosophy class. Of course, as a father and been around for a minute or two, I'm trying to prep him for this philosophy class.
Sure.
Okay. I don't want to go political, but, typically state schools or state-run schools or most schools tend to lean a certain direction.
Right.
Right, left. So I'm just kind of trying to prep him for, philosophy, let's just keep our head about us. And here's what philosophy is. And I read that definition to him. It's just the study of the field, the principles, the concepts behind, So it's not necessarily what we all think. Because I say philosophy, and I think of a long bearded professor that sits on his desk and talks about whatever may come to his mind. He's very philosophical. But in chiropractic, to kind of bring this back around, just thinking the philosophy of chiropractic should be the study of the founding principles of chiropractic.
Right.
or even, today, Stevenson. Anybody hear of Stevenson in the chiropractic world?
That rings a bell. It's vaguely familiar.
Now, he didn't come up with the 33 principles. He just organized it. So you can't really come up with a principle, because a principle just is. Does that make sense? And that's why we talk a lot in AMC and Aligned. It's founded on principles. Well, the principle never gets outdated.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a law. It's like gravity.
It's timeless.
It's timeless. You can argue with it, you can debate it, but when it comes down to it, it is going to remain. And I always loved the illustration, and I don't know if it was Sid Williams or Reggie Gold or, who came up with the keys. Do you remember this in chiropractic? Mm-hmm. They hold the keys, they drop it, right? Whether you believe in gravity or not, the keys are still going to hit the floor.
Sure.
Every time. So no matter what you think or don't think, or what your philosophy may be about gravity, it is. So if we can study the principles and understand that these are principles, take that philosophy word out of it for a minute and just study the precepts of what we're dealing with, I think we'll all be further ahead. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it really does. All right, so philosophy is a weighted word, right? In chiropractic especially. So if you say the word philosophy, you're already taking somebody's preconcepts or self-imposed ideas or disagreements. That's already entering into the conversation before you even really have a dialogue. So let's talk about the principles. Let's talk about where it's founded, those elements, and not even worry about the word philosophy. All right, that makes sense to me. So take us to the next level in your article.
Well, that was the article. No, it was just the fact of if we don't study what we do and why we do it, what are we doing?
All right, so let me make it applicable. You've been mentoring now for a long time. I think you're approaching 20 years, 15 years?
Well, I've been around AMC probably 18.
18, okay.
And a half years,
all right.
I think.
Right. All right. So in that time, you have worked with people who've had strong philosophy or a good adherence to principles, a good understanding of principles, correct?
Absolutely. Yep.
You've also worked with people who have none of the principles and are very just superficial principles or no philosophy, correct?
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. Illustrate for our listeners some of the key differences between those two people. You got person A, who's latched onto principles, doesn't spend a lot of time trying to prove it, figure it out, it just is. Person B, tapped in very superficially, if at all. What's the difference in these practices and these careers?
Okay. Trying to think about the best way to answer that. And it's more of a continuum as well, but if I had to break them into those two groups, it's really, and I think I've heard Tom say this, maybe you as well, it's the difference between like a surface level approach to things where it's just there's no depth, there's no understanding of the whys. Maybe it's the best, and again, in life, your why is going to drive you.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe I don't believe it. I know it's the same thing after experience over the years. If I have a deep enough why I do certain things, or you talked about principles versus non-principle based. Mm-hmm. If I understand the why, well, then I have zero issue executing and doing and getting behind that. It's not even a belief; it just is. So difference, over the years with mentoring doctors is the ones that come with and we won't call it philosophy, but a principle-based mindset. They want to understand why I'm doing something to a level. They're the ones that are still around like me today, 18 years later in chiropractic and in AMC Aligned, is I'm still here because I'm still exploring the depths of the principles in the AMC system.
Sure.
And I think that's where you see the longevity of chiropractors as well. Mm. Those chiropractors that are still in practice and still striving at 80 years old,
right,
seeing patients. Well, why is that? Because they've continually strived, because they understand the depths of chiropractic and the principles. And if you want to call it philosophy, we can call it philosophy. And they're still getting better and understanding that. And so when you talk about some groups, different others, and again, the beautiful part with AMC is we can take a principled chiropractor, and they typically do very, very well.
Yeah.
They have some deep whys. They are convicted. They are persistent. But we can also take a non-principle-based doctor and put principle-based procedures in place and still get a fantastic result.
Sure.
But what I'll tell you, there's going to be a longevity difference. And some of those non-principled, they'll come over once they start seeing, well, this works. Why does this work? And they'll figure that out. Ones that stay in the surface, they'll kind of jump around and do some different things.
It kind of goes along the same lines of the AMC Align system as a whole. There's all kinds of processes out there. There's all kinds of procedures, and God knows there's scripts and things of that nature. But I just was literally on a Zoom call just this week where with Henri Dalliers, right? Mm-hmm. And now Dalliers comes from a completely different background, and he is well versed in principled chiropractic, but he is very specific in his upper cervical, knee chest work. He's very well known for that. And but in the middle of this Zoom call, I mean, I really wasn't even participating with it. I was just listening in on it. He just chimes in and said, he goes, well, that's way back when I first started to practice. He goes, it's the reason I loved AMC. He says, I'd been around, I'd seen so much. He goes, but everywhere I go, they're either telling you to do this and not giving you a why, or they're giving you a why and don't have anything to tell you what to do. And he goes, but with AMC, it was the first and only place I've ever found where they were giving me the what to do, but the reason why I'm still doing it 20 years later is someone taught me the why. Right. I understand why I would do this procedure this way. I understand why my patient compliance is this. I understand why I do this class. I understand why the steps, the processes, the system. Same kind of thing as what Dr. Jeremy's saying, is that a lot of times doctors will come to Align and be around us. Have we ever, Dr. Shannon, in your 20-something years around here, have we ever done a technique class? Have we ever done anything that really is chiropractic, teaching chiropractic? We've never really done any of those kind of components.
Yeah, we're not teaching adjusting between, right.
But how many times have you stood in a class and I stood in a class and by the way, put myself out there, stick my neck out and say, hey, by the way, folks, how many in here since starting AMC, raise your hand if you're getting better results with your patients than you were prior.
All hands go
up. And I say, well, have we ever taught technique? Have we ever taught chiropractic? No. I was like, yeah, but when the patient's sticking around, any application of the principle of chiropractic has a chance, which is the longevity he's talking about, has a chance to work. I've always said, I really don't care what your technique is. I mean, I'm very specific on what technique someone's going to use to treat me and my family. Okay, so I am in tune with that, but I really don't care. I just want to help chiropractors because I believe that some nerve relief is better than no nerve relief. That's just the way that talk about philosophy. That's my philosophy of life kind of thing. So it's the same thing. The more you know about why you do what you do, which is what Dr. Jeremy's saying is, you can call it philosophy, but it's really just the study of what you do and why you're doing it. And diving into the principles of chiropractic is going to give you a higher conviction level. It's going to raise your value level, which Dr. Shannon, you and I do a lot of work on that. When you raise the value of what you offer, doesn't your conviction and your closing ratio, doesn't it affect every statistical component to the practice?
Absolutely.
Right. So it ties in with the same analogies.
Dr. Jeremy, I want to come back to you here in just a minute and give you a little time to think about this, but we're going to circle back to you, and I want to ask you, what advice, what direction would you give somebody who's listening and they know, hey, they need to lean into chiropractic principles more this year for themselves, for their career, for their patients? We have Dr. Zach Wilson in the studio. We announced him earlier. Dr. Wilson, you're a humble guy, but you are accomplished in your technique, correct?
I would like to think so.
All right. And your technique, if I understand correctly, is CBP, correct?
Yep.
All right. Tell our listeners what CBP stands for.
I've been in practice with CBP my entire career. It stands for chiropractic biophysics. And I remain humble enough to know there is no bottom to the well when it comes to philosophy of chiropractic, when it comes to principles. That's something I always admired of Dr. Owen when I joined Aligned AMC, is that he did base his life, his career, all of what AMC is on principles. And the more you learn more and more principles of life, principles of chiropractic, it allows you to really see that they don't change. There's nothing new under the sun with them. It's just that somebody has come along and managed to articulate it in a new way. So you think it's a new shiny principle of life, but it's really the same thing that's helped people be successful with whatever endeavor they so choose since the beginning of time. But the more and more that you learn about chiropractic, to me, the more you're able to take each component of chiropractic, the science, the art, the philosophy, each one of those three components you're able to take more serious in day-to-day application. And that's just going to lend itself to being able to take on more and more and more cases of a serious nature, which to me as a clinician allows for a lot more joy in practice. Tom, you're talking about doctors being engaged with AMC and Aligned for years and years, help them to, even though we never really talk about technique or clinical application, it's allowing them to practice and get better results than they've ever have before. That also brings with it the joy of practice and the joy of seeing lives transformed right before your eyes on the day-to-day. And that's a huge blessing. And so it would be silly to me for any of us to ever stop the pursuit of more deep understanding of principles of life, the deeper and deeper understanding of the philosophy of chiropractic and what's really possible within the human body through the application of chiropractic.
I've known you for a long time. Obviously, I know what your technique is, but I wanted to give you a platform to kind of talk about it from your perspective, from a general sense, not in how you apply it. But is that technique, is that healing methodology, would you think it's more rooted in science, philosophy, or art? Where does CBP have its like foundation stones laid?
The foundation is, it began with the philosophy. The founder, Dr. Don Harrison, he was an upper cervical focused chiropractor, but he also was one of the most intelligent men I had ever met. And when you have that mental capacity to earn a PhD in mathematics, be a mechanical engineer, and then go on to become a chiropractor, it really laid the groundwork for him to put a lot of pieces together for the science. So it was philosophically based, knowing the body can heal itself, knowing the innate potential within the human body. He was just able to really take the science aspect further than anyone had at that time. And his son, Dr. Deed, continues that work today, and all of his colleagues within CBP nonprofit, the research entity, they're doing fantastic work pushing the science, because that's where they recognize such a huge need in our profession, but they by no means have dropped the philosophy of chiropractic and the art of applying that technique to our patients.
So it's interesting because, now people like me on the outside looking in to that particular methodology, my thought is, well, that's probably a science-based, like very little philosophy, very little. So it's very interesting to hear you talk about where that is, because the people that I knew that were interested in that in school were people like Dr. Brubaker were saying that maybe philosophy wasn't their particular forte, right? They were drawn into something much more mechanistic, mechanical, science,
there is
whatever.
a strong mechanical aspect to that technique, a lot of math involved in that technique. So I think it's at surface very attractive to those who are mechanically minded, systematically minded, and of that nature like you described. But I think every technique out there will attract the variety of people and personalities to it. So you see it all.
How do you balance it? How do you balance it in your own practice? How do you keep the philosophy strong, even though you have a technique that is, it's not rooted in science, but very sciencey based, very numbers based? How do you balance that?
The technique still has to be delivered through a person. A technique's just a technique. For it to be applied, it has to be applied by someone. And so, just like everything in this world, you're never going to outgrow yourself. So if you want the technique to progress, or your clinic to progress, your practice to grow, your family to improve, you have to first work on yourself to be able to have that other stuff flourish. So I guess I just balance it in my own world as knowing I have to remain humbly confident enough to know I don't know everything, but confident enough to know I can learn anything I want. So I still see that being a very scientifically, mathematically based technique approach, but it still has to have a vehicle. So there's still the personal component of the doctor. And I could bring a monkey into my office as an associate and teach them how to methodically do a technique approach, but it will never have the same impact as another associate doctor that has a heart for the patient, that has a love for chiropractic as a profession, a love for the patient, and then utilize that technique or whatever technique you so choose to deliver the goods through that heart
in a systematic approach.
And then you need proper systems within the practice on which to operate, regardless of technique. Yep. And so there it is.
So I want to come back and circle back around to you. I want to give you some time to really think about this and consider your best case study out of your own office, right? The one that by all medical science, quote unquote, measurements should have never been produced, right? What is the case study for you? And maybe that's the wrong question, but what's the case study for you that really, that's the one that got deep inside of you, right? Mm-hmm. That's the patient result that when you're going through some tougher times, you latch onto that one and you remind yourself of the potential and the capability. So we'll circle back around here in just a minute as you think about that.
Nah, don't circle around. Let's just do it now.
Okay.
While it's on my brain.
Do it.
I don't know if there's a single one, because we see structural changes and lives being changed every day in the office. So you start having all these names filing through your head, right? And your Rolodex in your mind.
Right.
A Rolodex was if you forgot.
For the millennials out there.
For the millennials. But I think the one that if I had to call it out, it's going to be one person, but multiple occasions. I've got children. I've got 5 children, but one of them seems to find himself in need of chiropractic care more than all the others.
Okay.
My son, Micah, had an injury on a trampoline many years ago, and it buckled his lower neck and upper back, and it caused him to start having asthma attacks. And we corrected that asthma with chiropractic by just, delivering chiropractic like we would anybody else.
Sure.
And so he was able to overcome asthma. He injured himself again similar injury, different method, started having asthma attacks again because he injured the same area. We had to fix it again. Got him over asthma twice. He also had fallen playing sports, injured his pelvis to the point where it was so subluxated he couldn't put weight on his one leg and couldn't walk. We've got him walking and corrected that and got him back into action. And then recently he injured his knee in wrestling again. And we're correcting it and helping him recover and recoup through chiropractic. So he's probably my favorite case.
Sure.
Because he's an ongoing challenge, though we love him. But
you're very fortunate that your son is the son of a chiropractor, because all those cases together would have cost you about $1 million of medical care. Excellent. I appreciate that. Wonderful. All right, Dr. Brew, I left you with a question. What advice, what recommendations would you give to somebody who's listening to this and they know, they feel convicted in their heart and their spirit, they need to lean into some principles. They need to get stronger, better depth. What would you tell those people?
I'll go back to, I mentioned gravity earlier on in this show. And, I don't know if it's true or not, but the apple falls, right? Hits Newton in the head. And he goes, there's something to this, right? I don't have the equation memorized,
right,
but came up with an equation based on his experience, based on, okay, things fall, there's a reason, there's got to be so he dove into the study, right? And I did look it up as Dr. Zach was talking. I want to make sure the definition was square. Philosophy was the general principles of a field of study or activity. So it's the general principles of the field of activity or study. So let's say Newton at the time, he just gets hit in the head with the apple and goes, oh, that's neat, and doesn't pursue the study because there's a principle involved.
Sure.
And everybody knows it. You jump off the roof, the apple falls, it's going to hit the ground. There's a reason. But he studied the why. He started to dive deep into that. And what would happen if he hadn't? We live in Florida, and I swear they launch a rocket every 10 minutes. It's cool. I can go out in my front yard and watch the stream from that,
Sure.
up through the sky. And so you see where that is now in the space program. But you go back in time, that started somewhere. And I would argue to say it probably started back with Newton starting to study the field, the principles involved with gravity. Because gravity is predictable.
Right.
It's precise.
Yep.
It works every time. So when we see these things like satellites and rockets and things, well, that's all a derivative of mathematics.
Sure.
They land those secondary or the primary portions of those rockets. They land them now to a barge in the middle of the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
4 minutes after. They put that sucker right on the bullseye, not by accident, because they have a predictable, precise equation that's going to allow that to happen.
Right.
So that's a principle that we just don't even think about. Oh, there goes a rocket, no big deal. But they only got there to this point because over the years, somebody has decided to continue to dive deeper into the principles of physics, of mathematics. You follow me?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I know we're talking chiropractic, but I think it's true. If we want to be a better clinician or practitioner, and you don't continue to dive into the principles of the study or activity, where's that? Next year is going to be the same as this year, or typically it doesn't maintain. It's going to go the other direction.
Right.
Right. Every reference in my life will probably come back to athletics. It's just how I'm wired, but there's never a maintaining your physical being, at least in my experience. You're either progressing or going the other direction. So if you don't persistently pursue that, you're going one way or the other. So bring it back to chiropractic. I think this year, if we want to consider, the spaceship compared to the apple, that was a process. And I think in your chiropractic process, your philosophy, your principles, if we pursue that, well, you don't know what kind of spaceship you're going to build here in this practice or what you want to. But I'll argue, say, if you're not diving deeply into the whys of what you do and the principles behind it, that's going to be a much longer, arduous path. And you may never get there and launch that rocket in that practice. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well said. Absolutely. I know for me, I came out of school much more on the mechanical side of things, right? That made sense to me. Some of the philosophy stuff, and we didn't have the best philosophy instructors, so that had a role to play as well. But that was much more challenging for me. But after I got into practice, established practice, I had a system that produced the predictable results. You're talking about that element of it. And because I had this system that produced predictable results when it came to managing my patients, I got to see for myself firsthand the patients improving beyond my level of understanding. Right. And that was the most convicting thing about chiropractic philosophy for me, is when I came to it and just through the grace of this system and the wonderful nature of this system and how comprehensive it is, I was able to have a long-term relationship with people and didn't just see their pain subside very quickly, but also saw their health improve and sustain, and other problems like disappearing off of their health questionnaire. That was very, very convicting for me, right? And I still come back to that right now, because there are many things about philosophy that are like very challenging. Like, I don't understand that. How does that happen? But it happened in my office, and nobody can ever take that away from me, because I saw those patients. Those patients weren't telling me a story. They were living that. So I see you nodding your head over there, Tom. Is there something you want to add to that? All right. So, yeah, go ahead, Dr. Jeremy.
Maybe one last comment on that, Dr. Shannon. You essentially describe principle number 6 of the 33 principles. So if you don't know what that is, look that up in Stevenson's text. But there's no processes. It does not require time. My favorite one. And that's true. That's true in chiropractic.
Absolutely.
And that's the difference between what you're saying, a pain model practice, and one where you're going to see visceral and just some wild changes health-wise, because there is a time component. So I just thought that just bubbled up going, yeah, that's principle number 6. Yeah. I don't know them all by heart, but I know that one.
Well, I'm glad you remembered that point number 6. I didn't know I was living that. So it's nice to know that I'm normal for a change, Dr. Jeremy.
It may be a stretch, but we'll go with it today.
I asked Dr. Zach about his, the case study that really resonates with him. You have a career not only as a chiropractor delivering care to patients, family members, but you also have a career mentoring successful chiropractors all over the country. Is there a case? Are there some cases that either you managed or your members have managed that really resonate with you, that really stick out to this thing called philosophy?
Are you talking more like a patient case, or
kind of like a patient case? Like sometimes, because I know our family members will share some great results that they're having in that week, and that's part of their good news and stuff. So is there one that bubbles up for you?
Well, just recently, doc that just returned to AMC Aligned was a member for years, kind of took a break, but came back and started putting the principles back into place that have drifted off.
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah. And I can use his name, Dr. Matt.
Dr. Matt.
And he sent me, and again, we're just putting back into place a lot of the core fundamentals, things that he knows that has drifted away from, but is seeing remarkable shifts in that practice already just in a few months, from acceptance and compliance and things of that nature. But he sent me a great, it was just a short sentence or two, a patient of his just recently, and I'm probably gonna mess it up, but their eyesight was like 23,000 or something, like very poor eyesight.
Wow.
And in a matter of, again, I'm not going to get the timeline right, but long story short, this patient, this young child, recent trip to the eye doctor, her eyesight is now 20/30. and so it was just one of those things. I read it, I'm like, that can't be right. So I had to call and ask him. He's like, no, that's legit. That eyesight has changed so much. And the only change in difference was what? Chiropractic care. Mm-hmm. There's no other explanation for that. So just one of those cases that, from a philosophy standpoint, if that's what we want to call it, you can't explain that other than the pressure has been released from that nerve affecting, and the body has now taken that and utilizes that and is doing some healing. So some pretty wild stuff.
Even cranial nerves that aren't coming down through the vertebral column Yeah.
That's right. And
That's crazy.
yeah, that's a tricky one, science-based to,
Yeah,
to
exactly.
explain. But I'm guessing there's some blood vessels that are probably trophic to
probably,
those
sure,
areas.
yeah.
And, there's ways to get there, but you can't deny the A plus B equals C,
Yeah.
the clinical results. That's why I love chiropractic. I love the thing that we can celebrate and we can sell, if you will, is results. Just get them.
I have a friendship with a veterinarian who teaches chiropractic adjusting to veterinarians and to chiropractors for animals. They're teaching them how to assess and adjust animals. I'm talking small animals, large animals on a farm, it runs the gamut. And he came to one of our summit meetings and he did a presentation in our philosophy class. And, he's a fun guy. He makes his presentations fun and engaging. But one of the most poignant moments of that whole presentation was he was showing before and after pictures and videos of those animals under chiropractic care. Now, the owners of the animals are not bringing them in because they have a pain, right? They're bringing them in because they have dysfunction and disease. And they're paying very good money to get this animal adjusted. And the results on the video over just, a few days or a few weeks, a few adjustments to that atlas or whatever's going on with that particular animal was amazing, right? There's no placebo in that, right? There's no belief system for that animal. All that animal knows is what's going on inside of their body and responding to their innate potential. Well, what was amazing about that is we had several people in the audience, even people that I thought had very strong philosophies, who could not stop talking about those before and after videos of those animals, which to me goes to show you, we all need a reminder about this type of stuff, right? We don't need to drift so far into our success or our technique or our system or whatever that we lose sight of this cornerstone of why do we do what we do and what's the value. So I just wanted to add that there, not at the end, but it's just coming to my mind as you're talking about that story, because I don't understand how that cranial nerve is going to improve, but obviously there's something to it. Right? So, cool. Anything else to add, Dr. Zach?
Well, I'd like to give a shout out to Dr. Fred out in Nebraska. He's been working to gain a lot more of that enthusiasm back into his practice, and he's had to persist and persevere through a lot within his family over this last year. And I admire him because through the AMC system, and he's working to put more and more of those pieces into play with his practice, but it's helping him to really find that balance between work and family. And we all need to keep that balance in life, but it's having these proper procedures and protocols within his office that's allowing him to work towards that proper balance, because otherwise it would just be chaos everywhere. And so it's a pretty neat thing to watch him flourishing with that. And he had shared with me a case that had come through his practice of an elderly patient who has been regaining digestive and bladder control through his care. And that's another good reminder to us all on how far-reaching chiropractic can be for our patients, and just neurologically speaking. So good job, Dr. Fred.
Nicely done, Dr. Fred. Proud of you. Great results there. When I was at my chiropractor's office yesterday, before I came down for this summit meeting that we're at now, the chiropractor introduced me to a patient that he'd been working with for a while. It's an older fella, and you wouldn't think anything about it just to look at the guy, but he introduced him to me as a retired chiropractor, and I kind of took umbrage at that, but I understand what he was going for. But he had this guy tell me his case story, and this older man was, for weeks at a time, unable to walk, unable to get around. He would literally be on his couch for weeks at a time, and he told me that when he had to go to the bathroom, he had to roll off the couch and crawl to the bathroom. And this dude is standing upright, has a dog like I don't know if it's a service dog or not, but he had a dog with him. The dog's like tugging on the leash. He's stable. He's not going anywhere. And he's walking around, and you would never know that he had that in his history. And as he's telling his story and his journey, he's really reliving all that. So I asked him when he finished that, I said, what was that worth to you? He said, well, I'll tell you what it was worth. It was worth my independence. And I said, I believe that, sir, and don't you ever go backwards. He said, I'm not ever going backwards with this guy. And he pointed to the chiropractor, with this guy's help, right? But that's all around us, right? And I don't think when we're in the day-to-day grind of the business and running all that and managing the staff, whatever, we tend to lose sight of that power and that value. So I appreciate you sharing that case.
Yeah, that's a neat story. I thought you were going to share how it helped you control your bladder.
Nothing has been able to help that yet. So appreciate you bringing up that embarrassment. Go ahead, Tom. I know we need to wrap this up, but as I've sit here listening to the different examples that the three of you keep bringing up, it reminds me that the further you know who you are, your identity, and your value of what you bring, how does that relate to the chiropractic practice itself? The potential within the practice and the business is each and every one of you talked about things that are outside the scope of surface level chiropractic pain model.
Right.
So what did that do to your marketability?
Right.
Your scope of practice was expanded with every condition that you guys brought up. Eyesight, you had the digestive issues. These are not, you're diving deeper and deeper, and by doing so, you're opening yourself up to a larger scope of practice within any one community and market outreach, which in turn expands your potential.
Absolutely. So. And it's not just that. I've mentored doctors who, like you were saying, Dr. Brew, were just on that surface level of the principles and didn't really take a deep dive into it. And they were very successful, right? They're making money. They're profitable. They're, by all external measurements, they're having a very great life. But the person who has the philosophy has that same outcome with one key added bonus: fulfillment inside about what they're doing. That's where I see the line of demarcation. Both of them can do well in this thing of rendering care and helping patients. Both of them can be profitable, have a nice life, nice living, but the fulfillment and the joy that they carry every single day, it's a completely different story for that person who knows their why, knows their value, has that broader scope available to them. So good. Hey, Dr. Brew, we got Dr. Zach doing a shout out. Don't want to leave you in the cold there. What about an honorable mention or a shout out from your roster?
Well, there's a lot I could mention, but I'll bring it down to one. And I just shout out for Dr. Maureen Work.
Oh, right.
Great member with AMC for a long time.
Yeah.
And we talked a little bit of persistence and principles and philosophy in this conversation. And she kind of has been exemplifies a lot of those in 19 years, and has just consistently grown her practice year after year after year, and set new records here in 2022. We're now in 2023,
sure.
And just so proud of her. But she's one, again, she has a deep conviction on chiropractic and a very technical technique. So the science is there, but her driver is the principles and the philosophy that drives the technique, which allows her to serve her patients and see just remarkable results as well. So
that's an awesome one. I know that we're, as always, running against the clock. I'm probably getting the bad face because I'm running over again. Listen, I want to do something that we don't normally do. Now, I'm not extending this to you listeners because you feel like you want to debate somebody. Nobody in this studio is interested in a debate about principles or philosophy or anything else. But if you need to talk to them about their technique, about their results, about their philosophy, if you need to talk to the people that we're mentioning in our honorable mentions, you contact us through the mailbag at amcfamily.com. let us know who you want to talk to, and we will make sure that you get connected with that person. But the caveat is, it's not a debate forum, right? Nobody here has time to waste with debating something that is already proven and already a principle. But if you need to latch on to something that you heard here today, and I or Tom can connect you with that resource, we are happy and willing to do that. In addition, you're always invited to attend or join us at a summit. Of course, registration is required. And we would love for you to check out the loads of free content we provide to social media every single week. Until next time.